Alrighty, for our next section, what we're going to be talking about, again, with the Cartesian coordinate system, we're going to start looking at how do we compare locations in the coordinate system. Last video was about where are we in the coordinate system. Now it's how do we compare the different points. So just knowing where we are isn't always useful. Sometimes we need to be able to compare to other places. So, and these numbers are, like, I found these numbers out, they're real numbers. We could say that Mount Lake Terrace High School is 1,422 miles west and 537 miles north of the center of the contiguous U.S. And we could say that the world's largest bowling pin is 967 miles east and 812 miles south. But that doesn't really tell us how far away that bowling pin is. It tells us where each of these things is, but in order to find that out, we would have to find the distance between them. So turns out those two things are 2,531 miles apart. And that tells us a little bit more about the situation than just knowing where things are. So we need to be able to describe those types of things using numbers. So first we have the distance formula. And in order to get to the distance formula, we have to talk about the Pythagorean theorem. So recall in your geometry classes, the Pythagorean theorem deals with right triangles, where we have side A, one leg A, one leg B, and our hypotenuse C. The Pythagorean theorem states that A squared plus B squared equals C squared. So let's talk about how we can use the Pythagorean theorem to derive the distance formula. So we're going to consider 2 points, x1, y1, and x2, y2. It doesn't matter where they are. I'm going to make a coordinate system here, and I'm just going to make 2 generic points. We'll call this one here x1, y1, and we'll call this point right here x2, y2. So when I've got those 2 points there, what I can end up doing is I can construct a triangle. So I can figure out how far down this is. And I can figure that out by finding how far it is between y1 and y2. So what I'm going to do is y2 minus y1. Doesn't matter what order it's in, it's always going to come up with the same answer. And then I'm going to find out this distance here, which is going to be how far is it between x1 and x2. So that's going to be x2 minus x1. And so I have these distances now. So I know this length here, and I know this length here. So if I want to find the point between these two, which would be this line in red, in order to do that, I could use the Pythagorean theorem now. So setting up my Pythagorean theorem, I'm going to have x squared minus, or x, not x squared, whoops, x2 minus x1 squared, because it's distance squared, plus y2 minus y1 squared, and that's why our order of x and y doesn't matter, because when we square it, it becomes positive, and that's going to equal c squared. So in order to find the distance, we want this thing right here, we want c, not c squared, so I'm going to take the square root of both sides. And when I square root both sides, that's going to end up giving me my formula. We're going to say that the distance equals x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared, all underneath the square root. That's going to be our distance formula. So just to formalize it, d equals x2 minus x1 plus y2 minus y1 squared, and square root. That's our distance formula. The halfway point between two points is something that is midway between, so we call that the midpoint. And when we're talking about finding the midpoint, it's also the average. It's averaging the distance between the two. So in order to find the midpoint, I just average my x's and I average my y's. So midpoint is at x1 plus x2 divided by 2, comma, y1 plus y2 divided by 2. That's all we have to do for midpoint formula. We've already talked about absolute value. We've already talked about the absolute value rules. But make sure you watch. There's one more video coming out on this, and make sure your section P1 homework is done. Again, it's not due until next week, but if you're making sure you're on top of it every day, you're not going to fall behind and you're not going to have that workload start to build up on you. All right, I'll see you guys on Thursday.